Airsoft guns, maybe you've seen them at your local Canadian Tire, your local Walmart. They're a type of gun that kids can use. They're used by people that don't want a real firearm. But now we've got a court ruling that says they are real firearms and need to be treated as such. Faith Goldie's been following this story. Brings us up to date. Faith, how did this case start? What's this all about? An airsoft gun is the same as a .308? What?
All air guns now are firearms. It all started off with a young man out of Ottawa named Christopher Dunn. He was suspected of having a handgun. Well, that eventually makes its way to trial. They say, nah, it's just an air gun. He didn't have any sort of harmful intent with it. So we're good. Why? Because Canadian law says so. There are two types of firearms, technically. Let's just look at what they are. Technically, that you can almost look at them as three: air ones, spring ones, and gas ones. And you can really qualify these under four different categorizations thereafter. The ones that we kind of look at almost akin to firearms when it comes to our firearms law and the criminal code are the ones with high muzzle velocity, which means they can go fast, they can hit hard. Over 500 feet per second is something that you'll hear the court say. Let's pull up that board right now, that second board that shows our different categories. Perfect. Now, the second one, if an air gun is used to commit a crime, in other words, if I perform some sort of bank heist using an air gun, then it's going to be treated as a real gun. So far you have two different categories where air guns can be technically treated as firearms. The third one are replica firearms that are air guns. And
replicas are not allowed under Canadian law.
Exactly, they're prohibited. Now, here is the fourth category, where the majority of the air guns are, including that of Mr. Dunn's. Lower muzzle velocity. They're not replicas. They're air guns that are neither firearms nor replicas.
You know, quite often they look clear plastic, or they're clearly not a regular rifle.
There's some sort of indication on them that it's like, this is definitely not a gun. When it came to Mr. Dunn's, his velocity was only 261 feet per second. That's almost half of what the firearms level was. Turns out the case goes to a court of appeal. Brian, get this. There are 5 jurors there, 5 judges there, as opposed to your typical 3. They decide, well, if you read the law this way and look at some precedents that way, technically, we can kind of mold some words and make all air guns qualify as firearms. And part and parcel of that statement is that they're also weapons.
So that means that all of a sudden you can't just go down to Canadian Tire and buy one. You need to go through the safety course, have a license, so on and so forth. And if you don't, you're a criminal that could be facing time in jail. The
one exception is licensing. So that's the one thing that they were pretty clear on. They said, look, licensing is the only exception when it comes to the air guns. But when it comes to safety, when it comes to storage, when it comes to proper transportation, any firearms owners, I know there are a lot that watch your show, Brian, will know we have to cross every T and dot every I when it comes to storing them and so on and so forth. However, I mean, there's technically no regulation right now on how these air guns are supposed to be stored, are supposed to be traveled with, except they're now firearms. So
you could end up being charged with unsafe storage for not following the same procedure as with, as I mentioned earlier, say a .308 or a shotgun. And you might need an authorization to transport. Well,
we don't really know. I mean, and this even includes your average BB gun. I talked to firearms expert and lawyer Solomon Freedman, and he had this caution for parents. Listen in.
What I would tell parents, you know, and anyone owning an object like this, is to exercise extreme caution, to lock them up, because we have yet to have a single case to tell us what careless storage means for a pellet gun, and I really would not like any of your viewers to be the first one to find out.
Yeah, that could be quite the penalty if you look at previous cases. How many air guns are out there? I'm guessing there's quite a few.
Yeah, well, here's the thing with air guns. There's no such thing as a registry. You don't have to sign them out of the Canadian Tire or Cabela's or what have you. So, I mean, estimates from the retailers I've spoken up to are in the millions. Forget about, you know, the couple thousand that we were dealing with the Swiss Arms. We're talking about millions in Canadian homes, a lot of them belonging to kids. How do you police this? How do you prosecute this? We're really in a cloudy, murky bit of hot water.
Do we have a solution? I understand the government's looking at trying to rectify this through legislation.
Well, the folks at Public Safety, although they're combating terrorism the rest of it right now, they were good enough to get back to me, and this is what they had to say about this case. We understand that this is a problem, and we will fix it. We are at the moment working on this. People can continue to use the pellet guns, but use them in a safe way that, as we're sure they already do. Look, it is up to the government to legislate these sorts of things. They're going to have to combat this back with some sort of legislation that says, hands off our air guns.
All right. Faith, great talking as always, and we'll continue to track this and see, and maybe I need to go home and look at a few things, make sure they're stored safely. Faith.